Welcome to Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and talk to industry experts about debt, money, and personal finance. I'm Doug Hoyes. Today, we will talk about debt and money and personal finance, but to start, we're going to talk about pregnancy. What? No, don't worry. This show always gets a clean rating on iTunes. Today, the discussion will be about financially preparing to start a family. It's great that we have kids when we're young because otherwise we wouldn't have the energy for the 2 a.m. feedings and diaper changes. But the disadvantage of having children when you're in your 20s or 30s is that you're still young, so you're probably not well established financially. You haven't been in the workforce for 20 years. You probably just bought a house, so you've got mortgage debt. You probably just bought a minivan with a loan, so cash is very tight. So how can you financially prepare before your bundle of joy arrives? I don't know. I'm a guy, and both of my sons are teenagers, so my memory of those early days are somewhat foggy. So today, my guest has a much more recent experience with starting a family, so let's hear what she has to say. So let's get started. Who are you, and what do you do?
Hi, Doug. My name is Christi Posner, and I am a credit counselor for the Credit Counselling Society. I'm also a lead writer for mymoneycoach.ca, which is a website that helps people learn to manage their money and learn about credit and learn how to pay down their debt and save money.
Very cool. Well, thanks for being with me, Christi. And I will put notes to that website you referenced and everything else we talk about in the show notes over at hoyes.com. So you had your first child in 2014. So when was your son born?
He was born in July of 2014, a beautiful summer day. So he's about 8 months old now, yeah.
So you're still at the very early stages, obviously, with a young child at home. Why don't you walk us through a bit of your history then? So tell us, how you got started in the whole credit counseling thing. What your, give us a bit of your life story.
For sure. I always knew from a young age that I wanted to be a mom. When my mother asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up one day, it was a mom. That was my answer. And so I knew this as I went through university and I got my Bachelor of Human Ecology and learning how families manage their stress and their money and their time and learning all about that. Come 2010, when I graduated from university, I applied to a position at the Credit Counselling Society as a credit counselor, and it ended up being my dream job. I was really lucky to come out of university and work for such a great company. So during university and as I'm growing into my 20s and, starting to establish myself, I would continually dream about what having a family would look like. I had a boyfriend, and we were starting to talk about those kinds of things. And I would dream about our little kids playing around in the house one day and running through the yard and that kind of thing. But, once I stopped dreaming and we would come back to reality, I would realize that that's not where we were right now. We weren't where we wanted to be. When he became my fiance, we were living in a condo at the time where we had to walk up 3 flights of stairs just to get to our condo. And I couldn't imagine being 9 months pregnant or carrying, car seats or kids up those kinds of stairs. We didn't have a yard to play in. We weren't physically where we wanted to be. We weren't married yet. And we were in a ton of debt from university. I used to work for banks and credit card companies, and I had really tempting staff rates, and I'd racked up a lot of debt before I became a credit counselor and really got myself together. So we decided that if we were going to have a family one day, we needed to start working towards that goal. And while we wanted to get married, we wanted to have a house and a yard and everything, we couldn't afford any of that with all of our debt. So that's where we really had to start. So the hard conversations and the arguments and everything started happening so that we could get our debt in order and reach our goals, essentially. So we started by creating a budget. We had to sit down and take a real hard look at where our money was going. Why were we going into debt every single month? And, was it frivolous spending? Was it that we were living beyond our means? We had to figure that out. So we took a hard look at our money. We wrote it down on a spreadsheet on our computer, and we also tackled our debt by consolidating it together, his debt and my debt together. And we found that if we stuck to a budget, a realistic budget, we were going to be able to pay 25% of our take-home income towards our debt. And we did. And in 2 years, we paid off over $30,000 of consumer debt together. By that point, we were then able to see that there was a chance that we could get married one day. We actually could afford a wedding, and by the time that we became debt-free from our consumer debt, the housing market had actually improved, and we were able to sell our condo for a profit. So with that profit, we made a down payment on a house with a yard, and then here we are 4 years later, and we've got a sweet little baby boy, and we're very, very happy.
Very cool, very cool. So you said you did some analysis to see what was happening with your spending. Why you were in debt. Obviously, I understand you were going to school, you had student loans, things like that, but you said even after you were done school, you were still in effect running a deficit every month. So why was that? What was causing that?
Back then, I had no concept of a budget. I usually spent money whenever I needed it or whenever I wanted to spend it, whenever I felt like it, and I usually had to dip into my credit cards to make it to the next payday. And it was really hard to keep track of my money because at the time I was working 3 different part-time jobs while I was attending university, so my income was changing every time I got a paycheck. So I just spent until there was really nothing left to spend. Looking back now, I can see that my expenses added up to more than the money that I was actually bringing in. So once my fiance and I actually sat down and really looked at what our income was and where our money was going every month, we were then able to start making some positive changes.
So the key point is you had to write down where your money was going every month so you could figure out where your money was going, and you discovered that it really was a case of just spending more than what was coming in, and because you had access to credit, well, you put the spending on the credit card and it's all good. And it wasn't until you took a step back and actually crunched the numbers and said, oh, wait a minute, my ultimate objective here is to own my own home, have a family, and there's no way I can do that if I'm digging myself into debt. And that's what caused you to step back and say, okay, we've got to actually watch where the money is going. And that was really the first step for you then, reducing your expenses to below your income?
That's exactly it. We had to make sure that we were not spending beyond our means anymore.
Great. You had to be sure you weren't spending beyond your means anymore. That's a great spot to end the first segment, so we're going to take a quick break and be back with more tips from Christi Posner.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30 with Doug Hoyes. We'll be right back. You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back to Debt Free in 30. My name is Doug Hoyes, and my guest today is Christi Posner, who is a credit counselor. She's also a writer, and she is a relatively new mother. And she's been walking us through what it's like to get financially prepared to start a family. And so before the break, she told us that the first step is to write it all down, make a budget. You need to see your numbers in front of you. And that has 2 components. Christi said, well, you got to start by looking at the income, what's going to be coming in when you're on maternity leave. And she had some good suggestions there in terms of looking at what maternity benefits you'll qualify for, what other government benefits, what's your employer going to do, and so on. And then obviously taking a look at your expenses. And Christi, when you were talking about expenses, part of your analysis was to figure out what expenses I have now and what expenses are going to change. So can you give us some examples of that? You talked about it a bit before the break. What expenses did you see that actually went down when you were planning for maternity leave and when you went on maternity leave?
Some of the expenses that I was surprised by, I thought that our fuel would stay relatively the same, but our fuel for our vehicles went down significantly because I'm home most of the time. So that's one place that we found that we were going to save money. And another one was our cell phones. I'm on my cell phone quite a bit, and I used quite a bit of data while I was in the workforce. And my cell phone plan, because I'm at home with Wi-Fi, I didn't really use any data. So that went down significantly as well.
Did you actually change your cell phone plan, or it just went down because you weren't being charged the same overages?
I changed my cell phone plan because I didn't require the same amount of data that I was using while I was working. So we made a change and significantly reduced that cell phone plan.
That's a very good practical point then, that to take a look at what you're paying on your cell phone now. And that's an area where 20 years ago, 30 years ago, nobody had a cell phone because they didn't exist. And now they're tied to our hip at all times. But you're saying, okay, a big chunk of my bill was data. If I'm at home, I link into the Wi-Fi. I don't need it. No sense continuing to pay for 3 megs a month if I'm not using it. So those are a couple of the things that went down. You mentioned in the earlier segment about clothing. Did you reduce your clothing expenses, or did that go up? I mean, obviously you had to start buying clothes for your son, but did your own personal clothing expenses change, or how did that work?
They definitely did. My priorities changed really quickly when we were looking at our maternity leave budget, because when you want to have a family, that's where your money is going to go. And it's going to be, if we have to choose baby clothes over spending tons of money on my own clothes, that's perfectly fine. I feel like I used to spend money just because I had it, which isn't the way to manage your money. Just because you have money doesn't mean it needs to be spent. It's kind of my new mantra that I think of.
That's very good.
Yeah, the clothing expenses certainly went down, as well as my going out. I don't go out as much anymore, so I don't need as much entertainment expenses. So yeah, there were a lot of changes.
It's kind of hard to be hitting the bars when you got to go to bed at 7:00 at night. So I understand that. So those are the expenses that went down. What expenses went up? So obviously there's the obvious ones, I have to start buying diapers. I have to start buying wipes. Do they still have diaper genies? Is that still a thing now? Do they still have that, or am I? They do. Okay, because I love that thing.
That's not the route that I went. We actually did a full analysis on the cost of disposable diapers versus cloth diapers. And while we're not big fans of the fun of cloth diapers, we'll say, we decided to go that route because financially it made sense. We ended up spending a couple $100s on a set of diapers that is going to carry us through not only our first child, but any other children we may have, versus spending $100 and some odd dollars on diapers every single month. So that was another area that when we looked at that budget, we saw we're in a big deficit if we're going to go on a maternity leave income. We had to make some hard choices, and that was one of the ones we made, was to cut out the disposable diapers, reuse.
And are you washing them yourself? Do you have some service do that? How does that work?
Oh, in Winnipeg, we don't have a service like that available. So yes, I am washing them myself, and it's not as bad as the horror stories you hear. It's really not.
Well, you're tougher than I am, because I know changing diapers was that boy. It was never the fun thing. The happiest days of my life were when my sons were toilet trained, let me tell you. So let's get back to our discussion about expenses. Your point on diapers is that you actually crunched the numbers and figured out what it would cost to buy disposable diapers and compared that to the cost of buying cloth diapers and washing them yourself, and you decided it was worth it to go with the cloth diaper alternative. So even though that resulted in more work for you, it was a significant saving. So what about other expenses? Were there any expenses you actually had to save up for?
First, we had to save up to actually furnish the nursery. So we had to buy a crib, a change table, a rocking chair, and we actually found a nice dresser on Kijiji for a steal of a deal. And then once our son was born, we realized that we still weren't as prepared as we had thought we were going to be, because as parents, you'll never have everything that you actually need prepared. There's always going to be moments where you're thinking, I need to go get this. I don't care how much it costs. It's going to save my sanity, so I need to buy it right now. So some of those things that we didn't actually expect that we had to buy were things like formula. We had to buy that to have it on hand when I wasn't available to feed our little guy at home. So that wasn't an expense that we didn't think that we'd have to buy. We always thought that I'd be able to pump enough milk for when I was away, but you can't always prepare for things like that. So we also recently started introducing solids to our son. That was something new recently. And within the first 6 months when he was born, there really wasn't much of a change in our grocery budget because he wasn't eating solids and he was just breastfed. But once we introduced that solid food, we had to buy the ingredients, which started to increase our grocery costs as well. We found it was more cost effective to buy our own ingredients and make our own baby food rather than buying the ready-made food generally, but we did have to have some ready-made food as well, so for when we're on the go as well. And now we're buying things like bowls, spoons, cups, those sorts of utensils for baby. And next up, we've got to purchase a car seat. So there's these ongoing expenses that always come up for us. So what we're doing to prepare for it is we're constantly transferring money every payday into a baby savings account, we call it, so that we've always got funds available for all these unexpected items that come up.
So there's all sorts of things that came up that you didn't even think about, and you're right, things like car seats. Unless you've had to buy one, you don't know what they cost. You talked about things that happened before your son was born. So wind the clock back a bit for me and tell me what advice you would give to new mothers and fathers in the very short period of time before your first child is born, say, a week or two before birth. What are some last-minute planning tips you would give to new parents?
One of the best things that I did just before I went into labor was setting up automatic bill payments and also setting up automatic transfers to our savings account so that our budget was on autopilot. We first had to make sure that our maternity leave budget balanced so that our expenses were equal to our new income that was going to be coming in and not more than our income that was going to be coming in. And once that was done, we knew that we had to put the budget into action on autopilot because paying bills and saving money wasn't going to be on the top of our minds as new parents. So we made sure that all of our bills, our water bill, our cable bill, electricity bill, all those bills would be automatically pulled out of our checking account. And I know that the sound of that scares a lot of people. It terrifies people because they're worried that if the money's pulled out automatically, what if the money is not there? Then I'm going to be charged another $40 insufficient fund fee and I'm going further into debt. But I have to say that if you've taken the time to create a balanced budget and you are actually following it, you don't have to have that fear anymore because the money will always be there. So setting up automatic bill payments and also setting up automatic savings was the other thing that we did to prepare financially before our baby was born. We set up automatic transfers from our checking account into our different savings accounts every payday to save up for things like Christmas gifts, house repairs, emergencies, baby things. So we had all of those going automatically, which really helped us through.
Set up as many of your bills as possible on automatic payment and have a savings account to help you through. That's great advice, Christi. Thanks for joining me today. I'll be right back to wrap it up here on Debt Free in 30.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30 with Doug Hoyes. We'll be right back. You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back. It's time for the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. My guest today was Christi Posner, a credit counselor, a writer, and a new mom. Christi gave us a lot of great advice on preparing for a new baby, and she gave us lots of practical advice on budgeting, reducing expenses, and being prepared for the start of a new family. That's the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. So what are my thoughts on Christi's advice? Well, I thought she had a lot of great advice. I liked her approach to preparing for a new family, and in fact, her approach works well for any upcoming life change, whether it's getting married, starting a family, or moving to a new city, or even retiring. Her starting point for preparing for a new baby is to get a handle on your expenses. She advises you to write it down and then start examining where you can cut expenses to build up your savings. That's good advice. Christi also suggests that you go to the employment insurance website to find out what level of maternity benefits you will likely qualify for. That helps with your future budgeting. There's also the universal child care benefit of $100 per month for children under the age of 6. And as I'm recording this, the government has announced that it will be going up to $160 per month and will be reflected on your July 2015 check. That's a few extra dollars to factor into your budget. I also liked her advice to consider what expenses you can reduce when you go on maternity leave. Christi found that she didn't need a big data plan on her cell phone because while she's home with her baby, she can use the Wi-Fi at home, so she proactively changed her cell phone plan in advance. That's another key point. Don't wait until after your baby is born to make changes. You'll have other things on your mind, so if you can do it now, that's the best strategy. Be proactive. She found that her costs for her clothing went down when she wasn't going to the office each day, and her fuel costs also dropped. That's good to know because that gives you some extra room in your budget. Of course, some expenses go up. We talked about diapers on the show. That's obviously a new cost. She also mentioned that initially their food bill didn't change much, but now that her son is starting to gradually start eating different types of food, those costs go up. Even if you make your own baby food, there is still a cost, and that should be factored into your budget. I also fully agree with her advice on automatic bill payments. Instead of worrying about when your hydro bill and other bills are due, set them up as automatic payments so they're automatically paid. It's easy and you have no worries. To summarize, make a plan, be proactive, and you can be as ready as possible for your new child. That's our show for today. This show is on the radio every week and also available on our website and on iTunes, so please go to hoys.com for a full list of participating radio stations and details on how you can download the show to listen on your iPod or smartphone. Full show notes are available on our website, and I'd love to hear your comments, which you can leave right on our website at hoys.com. That's HOYES.com. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoys. That was Debt Free in 30.
Thanks for listening. This was Debt Free in 30.